It's another episode of the Christian Reeve Podcast, but are you subscribed? If not, make sure to like, share and subscribe. Spread the word about the Christian Reeve Podcast and enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Christian Reeve Podcast. Today's guest is a podcaster all the way from Regina in Saskatchewan in Canada. His name is Cory Johnston. Welcome to the show. How's it going?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for agreeing to be on the show. I'll just say before we get started, I don't know if viewers would have heard this, but this was a Zoom recording, right? This is a Zoom recording. And that is the first time, I don't know if you heard that as well, there was like a little voice that just went, the recording is now recording or something. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
The hell? That's new. They've added that. That's
okay.
I mean, that's useful, I guess. But yeah, that creeped me out for a second. I don't know, but maybe you guys at home heard that. If so, I guess that's a fixture now at the beginning of podcasts. But we'll leave it in. It's fun. Whatever. I don't know.
Sure. Yeah. Then you know the recording has started.
Yeah, I know it's officially going. Well, do you know, it's funny. I'll just talk about that real quick. I always have these technical issues. Not always, but every once in a while it'll happen. And it happened last time I did a podcast. I was having issues with my camera, blah, blah, blah. But one of the things that I noticed is that I sort of obviously kept unplugging and plugging in my external camera, right? And that apparently stopped my recording. So the audio recording that I do. So for those who don't know, I do a Zoom recording, which is what you guys, if you're watching or listening to the podcast on YouTube, see. But for everyone else that listens to the podcast, they won't know that. And basically, the audio version gets recorded for a separate program called Mixpad, and I mix it all there. So to be fair, the quality there is much better than it is on Zoom, but only by a little bit. It's still the same stuff. It's just I control the levels a little bit better on the audio version, right? But you know, podcast, prioritize the audio. Do you know what I mean?
Sounds a lot like what I do.
Right. And then last time that happened, or I was having the issues with the camera, I pulled out the USB, and then after the recording, so it was afterwards, you finish, and I just looked at the audio, and it had only gotten like 20 minutes from, I don't know, an hour and a half podcast. And I always had that panic bit, but it's lucky because I've obviously recorded on two separate channels. But if you're only recording on one, I mean, this is just if I haven't said this on the podcast before, I'll say it again. For anyone who's a podcaster, aspiring podcaster, always have a backup.
At least one backup.
Just one. Yeah. Even if it's just sitting in the background, just make sure your computer can handle it. 2 programs. That's all you need. And like you said, you offered before we even started to potentially record the audio. I used to accept that. Now, because I've got 2 different options, it's like I don't think it's necessary. But sometimes, I don't know, if the audio is particularly choppy or there's issues, I don't know, sometimes I do accept it, and just as a kind of a third backup. But yeah, I don't know. Anyway,
yeah.
Let's talk about you.
Sure.
So speaking of podcasting, you are the host, and this is at the time of writing, so I'll just say this now. I always do my research on my guests way ahead of time. And I believe we might have scheduled this, I want to say about 2 months ago. So things might have changed.
Roughly.
Yeah, things might have changed in that time. But the last sort of moment that I did my research on you, I found that you were doing 4 different podcasts.
Yes.
So let's just go through these. You've got the From Many People's Strength podcast.
Yeah.
The Skeptic podcast.
Yeah.
The Mind of a Skeptical Leftist podcast, and finally the Feminist Family podcast. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. So,
well, my first question is how? How are you doing this?
The last one, the Feminist Family, we haven't recorded in a long time. So, I guess you could say that one has kind of fallen off.
Okay.
But I still do the other 3 podcasts, and it's a lot of work. Like, you got to just dedicate like a bunch of time to it. So I guess I'm lucky that I have a job that I work a lot of hours for 7 days, and then I have a week off.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So then on my week off, I still do like gig work. Like I do DoorDash and Uber and stuff like that. But I don't, because I make enough money on my week that I work, I can dedicate a lot of time to podcast work.
What do you do for a living? If you don't mind me asking.
Well, I work in the oil field in Saskatchewan. It's at a wastewater disposal plant. It's not my favorite thing, but the pay is good, and yeah.
So
that's about it.
Is it like not an oil rig? Have I misunderstood? What exactly is your position there? What do you do? Like,
oh well, I personally work at what's called a wastewater disposal facility.
Wastewater disposal facility. Okay. I think I'm getting there. Getting there.
So
where I got oil from.
Well, because the oil field, when oil is produced, there's like various ways of drilling and fracturing the ground underneath. And what they do is they use water, fresh water, salt water, for some of these processes, and then that water is contaminated, so they can't use it for anything else after that.
Okay.
So what they have to do is they have to bring it to us to dispose of it. And lately, we have a centrifuge, so we actually bring in like drilling mud, the mud that comes up when they actually drill the hole, and we put it through our centrifuge, and we try to extract water from it and separate solids from it so that we can take the solids to the landfill and pump the water down in our disposal well.
Okay, cool. And what exactly is your specific position there? Like, how do you influence the work? What do you manage?
I do it all. I'm a process operator. Like, I work by myself for 12 hours, making decisions on tank levels, where I need to do this and that, various process to try and get as much water out of the waste as I can so that I can dispose of it properly and figure out what else needs to be done.
So what would you say are kind of like the best and worst things about that position?
Working alone.
Fair enough.
Both.
Yeah.
It's great because I'm in control of everything that's going on.
Right.
If I know exactly what's happening, nobody can turn anything on without me knowing it. But also it's a lot of work because you're on your own. And so you're doing like the job of 2 or 3 people by yourself.
Is that by design, or is that one of those situations? Because I've worked in jobs before where it's like, this job is supposed to be done by 5 people, but here we are, 2 people doing it every week. Is it like that, or is it a bit more like, just, I don't know, you need a certain level of expertise to do it and it's difficult to find someone, or like, talk us through that.
It's just because it costs money to hire people.
I always annoys me when companies do that, man.
Yeah, like I started this job 8 years ago, almost 9 years ago, with zero knowledge in the oil field. So anybody can come and do it. But
yeah, it bugs me. Like, I remember years ago, I used to work in a supermarket, right? And that's where I got the whole 2 and 5 thing from. That's where that comes from. So like, we were supposed to have, say, a team of 5 people working at any one time. Obviously, there were times when it was a bit quieter, inevitably, right? But on a standard day, that's what you were supposed to have. Now, I noticed a pattern. I only worked there for about 3 years, but I noticed a pattern. And what would happen is, obviously, at times like Christmas and Easter, you employ more staff, temporary staff. I get that, right? But on a standard week, let's say middle of winter or middle of summer, you get busy days still. And inevitably, people don't turn up for work, whatever. Mm-hmm. But there were times when people would leave, like full-time member of staff would leave, and they just wouldn't replace that person.
Yeah.
For 6 to 8 months. And then what I noticed is they would basically keep letting people go until it got so desperate that you had to employ people.
Yeah, now, because things are just not getting done, right?
Right. And I understand kind of trying to save, like, cut costs, but how much, if you're a big business, especially like a supermarket, right? How much are you really losing on staff, considering the fact that you pay the minimum wage versus how much you're charging, how much you make per year, per week? Do you know what I mean? Like, to me, it sounds like cheapskate. I mean,
it's the nature of the businesses, right? Like they have to they have to maximize their profits. So every time they get a chance to reduce costs, which includes not replacing employees, then they absolutely have to just hold off as long as they absolutely can.
Craziness. All right. Well, let's bring it back to your podcast.
Sure.
Now, like I said, okay, fair enough. You're not doing the final one, the feminist one, but you've got a lot of different podcasts here. In my show notes, I kind of had it down as that you were quite a sort of politically minded person. So, yes. With every one of these podcasts, what kind of topics do you tend to discuss, and what's kind of the purpose of each one? Like, talk us through them and what you're trying to achieve.
Well, okay, so my show that I consider my show is The Mind of a Skeptical Leftist. Mm-hmm. And I came out of like the skeptical movement online, which was which was basically a bunch of people who kind of wanted to promote critical thinking and skepticism towards scientific claims. Okay. And various things. I don't know. It is a kind of a movement still, but during the early 2016, when Donald Trump was in office, a lot of the American side kind of took to being anti-social justice types. So, so then you had like a kind of a division within the community, but the skeptical ideology is that everything should be based on evidence or you shouldn't believe it. And sometimes the evidence can be sketchy or we can find flaws with it, but the best evidence available is where we base our beliefs. And so then in the social justice side of things, there were people on one side who were, hey, we don't believe the evidence, so, you know, racism isn't a systemic thing and we don't believe in patriarchy and all that. And then on the other side, there's the people who became termed like the regressive left or whatever you want to call us. Like, so then, you know, I being a leftist, because I identify as an anarcho-communist, being on the left politically and being of a skeptical nature who wants to believe in things on the best evidence, that is where the title comes from. It's The Mind of a Skeptical Leftist, because this is kind of a random show where I cover random things, but they always have to do with scientific skepticism and political left-wing stuff and social justice.
So do you
that was a long roundabout way to get to it.
No, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. So do you find yourself kind of getting involved? Okay, when you put stuff out, do you find a lot of like backlash, or do you sort of find yourself being drawn into a lot of controversy? Like, talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, you would think, actually, because the topics I cover, the way that I cover them, often are very like one-sided. Like I see things from a certain perspective, and I'm not being fair to right-wingers. I don't even pretend that I'm trying, right? So you would almost expect more pushback, but it's really rare that I get any kind of pushback. Maybe just because I'm still a relatively small podcast and channel, but also maybe it's just because I'm a white dude who works in the oil field. I'm not some teenage kid with purple hair that they can pick on, you know, and say, oh, well, you're just too young to have good ideas. No, I'm a 44-year-old man who's been doing this for a long time. So
I've always been very neutral when it comes to politics. I sit in the middle because I kind of see positives and negatives on both sides, right? So I always have a very interesting view. True. I always have a sort of like, I don't really like to get involved in politics because I'm not really interested in debating, and to be honest, no party really represents me. That's why I've never voted, for instance. But what I will say is that I do tend to, if I ever do talk about politics, I like to talk to open-minded people. And I found open-minded people on both sides. I do find there's a lot of people that are quite close-minded and just, in my opinion, just like to argue rather than, because if you look at what a debate is when you break it down, it's two people, if they're having a proper debate, two people who have opposing views, either trying to convince each other or maybe try to change each other's views, or maybe come to some sort of compromise. I suppose it depends on the goals.
Yeah, it depends on the platform of the debate too, right? Like,
right.
If you're trying to convince the audience, right? If you have an audience, you're not worried about your opponent so much as, did I make a point that the audience can agree with or disagree with, right?
But when you say, like, obviously you're trying to challenge right-wing people and you're trying to kind of, argue your point strongly and you have your strong beliefs, but do you ever do you sit down and take their views into account? Do you kind of sit there and acknowledge it, and are you open-minded to it, or are you kind of like just really, really, really against it? You're not even willing to listen. Like, where do you sit?
It depends what you mean by open-minded too, right? Like, I mean, I was in my late 20s, early 30s. I was a conservative.
Now, that's interesting. Okay.
So, the reason that I reject conservatism now is because of the staunch anti-climate change views that I encountered at the time. And that got me down the road of realizing that so many of these things that conservatives believed weren't based on evidence. They were based on some other thing.
No, it's interesting. No. You raise a really good point. Like, I think the interesting aspect to this is firstly the refreshing honesty. Like you say, I used to be this, then I flipped to the other side, right? And a lot of the people that are very high prolific, like I've said this in the past, but people like, say, Donald Trump have flipped and flopped between both parties. Not many people know this, but that's happened before. And obviously it's always tied to some sort of business interest and stuff like that. For yourself, climate change was the deciding factor. And obviously over time things change. And I think that's a very important point to make as well. There's a lot of people I've seen over the years whose political leanings change in accordance with their own personal lives. Because it's one thing to consider voting based on, how you want society to be at large. I understand. But then there's also the element of how it affects you on a local level. So, like, for example, in the UK, we have Labour and Conservative, right? Labour is more or less left wing, and Conservatives is pretty much right wing, right? And then you have parties that are in the middle and blah, blah, blah. So it's pretty much similar to what you guys have. Yeah. But we also have that local level and nationwide level. So, for example, the borough that I grew up in, the place that I grew up in, was conservative. It was right wing, right? But they did a really good job locally, right? They they did an excellent job. Politically back then, I guess I was more left, so I was kind of like just disagreed with them. But then I would look at the fact that they did such a good sort of job in my local area, and I was like, oh, this is interesting how you can sort of support them in one area but not in the other, because obviously nationwide I sort of disagreed with how they were running things and stuff, and it eventually led me to the point where now I sit in the middle, because I've seen what Labour did, I've seen what Conservatives have done, and now I'm like, none of you people represent me. Yeah But it's interesting how that divide, as far as how your voting changes according to your personal life, how the politics affect you in your personal life and where you are and the state you're in and the city, town you live in, versus a nationwide level. I feel like, and I'm going out on a limb here, but I reckon that a lot of people, when they're voting, they're more thinking about how it'll affect them on a day-to-day basis versus, voting to just remove someone out of us. I mean, if you take Trump most recently, I think a lot more people were inclined to go and vote because they just felt, okay, this person is not doing a good job running our country. And it's interesting, even for the Republicans, there were many people in that party that distanced themselves from Trump. And we've had similar things happen here in the UK, where there's like a problems, lack of confidence in the leader and stuff, and it makes sense, you know what I mean? Because at your heart, even if you are in a political party and you're sort of saying, I support this, I support these people, you're not necessarily going to agree with everything that gets put out, you know what I mean?
No, that's right. Yeah, it's I mean, for us, I guess you could say the farthest left party that in Canada is the NDP. We have a Green Party, but some of their policies aren't as far left. They're more centrist or conservative with of environmental leanings, right? But the NDP, like, some of their positions are really, like, they're very close to the Liberal Party, which is our, I guess you could say, our centrist party. And so those leanings, I'm often disagreeing with the party that I would tend to vote for more often, right? And I mean, in Canada right now, like, our culture follows the culture of the United States so closely that often when I'm voting, I'm just voting out of the idea of harm reduction, like, because I just want to make sure that I'm, doing the best I can for the people that will be harmed.
Yeah. Forgive me. So I actually forgot for a second that you're from Canada, and this was something that I wanted to ask you about. Yeah, I don't know, because when I talk about politics, the first thing that comes to mind is US, UK. But I wanted to ask you about this. Yeah, you're from Canada. You live in Canada, and like you say, you're far left. How would you say? I mean, how much do you know about UK and US politics? Just off the bat, like, what's your knowledge of that?
I followed the United States politics very closely, so. But UK, I guess you could say I know a little bit.
Okay, well, before I ask you about like the differences and the similarities and stuff, what's your reasoning for following US politics? Because I've had other Canadian podcasters or Canadian guests on the show, and they've sort of said similar things, like, yeah, I follow US politics and stuff, but why? You know what I mean? Like, I understand. I could theorize. I could be like, okay, well, US and Canada does a lot of trading together. It's neighbors. There's going to be reasons. But why do you choose to follow US politics?
I follow it because our culture mirrors theirs so closely. And when I see like a Donald Trump movement or a MAGA movement, I get concerned because I know that something similar is going to try happening here very shortly.
Interesting.
So like, I can't even remember the guy's name right now. The current leader of our conservative party, he actually like came up with like this slogan about bringing Canada back to Canadians or something like that. Like, it's very MAGA, but Canadianized, right?
That's interesting. So, do you know? No, on a side note, like, I think it makes sense because obviously, even here in the UK, we're heavily influenced by American culture and other cultures around the world too. But like, with certain things, we're heavily influenced. Like, for example, suing culture. That's always been a very American thing. But even here, it's become more prevalent. Right. You see a bit more of it in probably the last 20, 30 years than you did.
Especially if somebody says something bad about you, hey?
Yeah, I mean, for us, I think we're more concerned with slander and libel and stuff like that. We're more involved with that, and for example, UK press here, because we've got free press, they'll print anything they want, and I've said this on the show before, but they'll print anything they want, which I think is a good thing. They should have the freedom of speech to print what they want, even if it is bad. I don't believe in censorship personally. I've always been against it. I think you should, whatever you say, you should be able to say it. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's up to the public to choose whether or not they support you and what the consensus. I always think as a society we should always come to a consensus of like what we agree with, what we disagree with. Do you know what I mean? Come together on those,
absolutely
those big issues.
I think there might be some nuances to that kind of discussion because the power behind media right now is so one-sided, right? Like it's very, the rich and the powerful control what we see and hear.
this is why, I mean, this is one of the reasons as well why I don't sort of fit left or right politically, and why, because in the UK it's very well known that many of the major news outlets are heavily biased. I mean, you can tell by the way they write who they support. And sometimes they'll
Yeah.
even come out and say, like, it's hilarious. I remember years ago, The Sun, which is a tabloid newspaper here in the UK, obviously it's very famously run by, what's his name, the famous Australian media mogul, God, his name escapes me, but he's basically got business interests around the world, in America. He owns like many companies and news outlets and stuff. Like
Murdoch?
Rupert Murdoch, that's the one. Yeah, so he's got business interests around the world, got heavy kind of, like for instance, if someone's in power in like say the UK, right, he'll have heavy influence and he can affect your political standings. He can affect, how well your campaign goes. Right, which is ridiculous. He shouldn't be like that, but it is like that. That's how the world works, right? Yeah, and
exactly.
It's interesting to me because I remember The Sun for many years was Labour. They supported Labour, and they were very like kind of obvious, because a lot of the papers that are neutral, you can tell maybe they got a bit of a left or right leaning, but they don't come out and say it.
Right.
The Sun was like, we support Labour, we support. And I remember somewhere in maybe the 2010s. They had a bit of a falling out, I guess, with the Labour Party. I don't know. And so they printed that we support Conservative now. Like we are a conservative paper. And it's like, it's just, I don't know, that kind of fascinated me, like just how that happens and
that's
stuff.
like post media here. There used to be like local post media outlets across Canada, but then they got bought out. Well, they weren't post media, they were independent, but they like referred to themselves as the Leader Post or this Post or National Post or whatever. But then they all got bought out and they all got this same direction that they're supposed to do. They're supposed to be more conservative leaning. And that's just the direction that the leaders of the company want them to go. So that's what the kind of stories they're going to promote now.
So given that you have
that's all over Canada.
Cool. Thanks for sharing about that. But I wanted to ask you about, considering you have a good knowledge of these things, like what would you say are the major differences and maybe similarities between US and Canadian politics?
Our politics aren't quite. I don't want to give us too much credit, right?
Okay.
like I like to say that ours politics aren't quite as corrupt as the American system.
That's bold.
But yeah,
say that, bold.
But okay. Also, I don't know that that's true. Like it sometimes very much feels like the mix of business interests and politics is, it's too interlinked. And I mean, your average citizen doesn't get as much say as they think they do. So because they don't own companies, they don't own things the way that like Amazon owns things.
The current administration with Justin Trudeau, he's been in office for quite some time now. How many years has he been in power?
I think he's first one in, what was it, like 2015, 2014?
Oh, it's shorter than I thought. Okay, all right, 2015. Okay, so he'd be in his like second term, I suppose. Right now.
Yeah. And I'm depending on who you ask, we're looking at a short election cycle this time around because, I mean, Justin Trudeau only got a minority government last time.
Interesting.
So it's quite likely that there's going to be a non-confidence vote when it comes around time to the budget or I mean, people are saying it's coming this fall, but who knows? But.
How many terms can one particular president have? Is it the standard 2 terms or is it?
I think a prime minister can run as long as they want because we don't vote for a prime minister, right? Like we vote for the party.
Right. Yeah. But no, but
it's a parliamentary system, like
because I think in America you can only have 2 terms as a president, can't you? So like your party can keep getting voted, but I suppose let's say if who's currently in power, Joe Biden. So if Joe Biden won like twice and then they wanted to get into power again for the third time, he wouldn't be able to run.
They have to have somebody else run. It's an interesting, like they've got a weird setup because they've got their Senate is like, I don't know if things are like this in the UK, but their Senate is voted on where we have an appointed Senate.
Yeah, here's what I don't understand about that. If I've understood this correct, and I'm not big on politics, so forgive me for not understanding this. But as I understand, you can have a government. Let's say the US government is conservative, right? But then you can have not conservative, sorry, Republican. So you got a Republican government, but then you can have a Democrat Senate, right?
Yeah.
Democrat, right. So as I understand, every issue that they vote on, so let's say they put an order through or something like, we want to vote on this. And then it goes through the Senate, right? And then they debate it, and then they make sure it turns into law or a bill or something, right? That's how it works?
Sort of, because they've got the House and they've got the Senate, right?
So the House is the president's house. That's just true.
No, they've got, and then they've got the presidency as well. Like they've got
okay.
So they've got two Congress or parliaments or whatever, right?
Right. Uh-huh.
So they've got Congress people who are in the House, which is often, because of the way the districts are drawn up, it often leans Democrat. And then you've got the Senate, which is 2 senators per state, I think it is, regardless of the population. Congress is defined by population. Senate is based on 2 per state, regardless. And then, I think, feel free to correct me.
Oh, I know nothing, so I'm learning here.
So then that tends to lean Republican. And then whoever the president is voted on a separate issue, right? Like it's a whole other thing.
Mm.
And so you can have a bill that's created in the House and get voted on and approved by the Democrats who have the majority.
Yep.
And then it can get vetoed, or like it can get to the Senate where it has to pass through another set of votes.
Yeah.
Where it'll get rejected.
Yeah, that's what I'm fascinated by. So like the only way they can assuredly put stuff through is with an executive order, right? That's why Trump was doing it the whole time in his presidency. Yeah. So he didn't have to put it through the Senate.
Yeah. Well, he didn't have to put it through Congress or through the House because they had a Republican Senate while he was in power.
Right. Okay.
It's a mess, really.
It's a bit confusing. I mean, we've kind of got something similar, I guess. I mean, in the sense that, okay, in the UK, as I understand, you vote in the Houses of the Parliament. That's where the first vote happens. So the government brings a bill, and then all parties vote on it. And then it gets passed. Either it goes through the House of Lords, either before or after, but it goes through the House of Lords, and they do the same thing. And then I believe the Queen has to then kind of affirm the bills.
Okay.
Final thing. I don't know that this happens for everything, though. I know for major things it does. Right. She'll give like a seal of approval or whatever and agree to it. But it's like done in mass. So there'll be like a bunch of things that get like signed up or whatever. But technically she could veto it as well if she wanted to and be like,
that's like a rubber stamp, basically.
I kind of, but because I understand, because and this historically in the UK, I think this exists up until possibly Charles I's reign, where the power was given to the Parliament, but power was never really taken away from the monarchy. Right. It's just the monarchy basically essentially handed over power and said, yeah, we agree to this, but we still have an interest and we will still come down on you hard if we disagree with something. But it was essentially like giving over that power as a means of like, hey, you take care of this so I can free up my time to do other stuff. And these days it's not really acted upon, but technically it is possible. Right. They could just start running with an iron fist if they wanted to, the monarchy. I think that's how it works anyway.
Okay. Yeah. Like we've got our parliament, which is our members of parliament that we all vote on to send to Ottawa. And then there is a Senate, but it's an appointed Senate. And as far as I know, they don't do anything except just approve whatever the Parliament approves. So then you're stuck with like this kind of like just one group of people that decided everything. And there's no veto power at the prime minister's level. There's no like executive orders or anything like that. So I guess that's good. There's not one person that's just ruling with an iron fist. But yeah,
so far since you've been doing all this podcasting and getting involved with politics, have you had any sort of major clashes with right wingers? And if so, how did it play out? Like, how did you manage that situation? Like, you know,
I mean, how major is the clash online for somebody like myself, right?
You never know. I suppose it depends how you compose oneself, because some people would choose to just go on a tirade attack. Some people, it's like I said before, it depends on the debating, depends where you sit. Like, if I was to pick a side, for instance, me personally, if I was to decide to go political and choose a side, I would approach it from the perspective of, I want to debate people who disagree with me and learn something, you know, gain something from it, debate them, enjoy the process of debating, because it can be an enjoyable experience. But I think it depends if the other person is willing to you know, recuperate and actually debate you versus attacking you. I see a lot of attacking. Like, to give you an example, people automatically assume my leaning. I think they think I'm left because I've often spoken about like Trump on the podcast, and I've had people on that have kind of you know, said their piece about him that I didn't ask about. They just freely gave their opinion. And you know, to be honest, I don't really attribute Trump to Republicans. I see him as a businessman, and he just does what works for his business. Like, I truly believe this latest presidency, the main goal was get myself as much money as possible, make myself as many business deals, and set myself up. That's what I believe. Because look, he's a business guy. You know, he's always been a business guy. Look at his political leanings over the last 30, 40 years. They've changed according to his business interests. Yeah. Right?
Whoever was in power, he was cozying up to, basically, until Barack Obama. And
every president has some political, business interests. Like, that's not a new thing. Bush did the same thing. You know, if we want to take from the left, Barack Obama has used, I think he's gone into more like NGO stuff, but you know, he still set up business stuff for himself. Yep. Every administration does it.
Well, I mean, you could even say, like, you don't have to go to Barack Obama. You could say the Clintons, right? Like, I know they're a boogeyman, but they have major business ties to a lot of things. So.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and I think that sometimes it's difficult to see past that. But for other people, I think they really do believe that like every person that comes in or administration that comes in truly represents them. And look, I would like to believe that, but it's one of the reasons why I don't get involved myself, because I feel that like they might represent you on certain issues, but then there's always like a place where they let you down in some respect, you know, like when it comes to, if I take, I've said this on the podcast before, but you take conservatives here in Britain, they run it like a business. They run the country like a business, and they help the people that help them. So people that, in a way, you can't blame them for that. Like, that's what any political party would do. If I say to you, here's a bunch of money, I support you, and then you get into power, you're going to do your very best to make sure I get a return on my investment. You know what I mean?
That's just psychology. That's like, if somebody gives you money, you feel like you have to pay them back.
Exactly. And that's why I believe when people get angry about like, oh, you know, conservatives only represent the rich or whatever. It's like, well, Labour would do the same thing. do the same thing. You know, it's got nothing to do with class or anything like that. It's just helping the people that help you. But there is a bit of a class system here in the UK, always has been, or always will be. And I sense there is a little bit of that in America, but not in the same way. It's kind of different. But what about Canada? Do you have like a class system there? Like, what's the deal there?
Oh, I mean, under capitalism, every system is a class system, right? Like the struggle is class struggle. But yeah, we have an increasing, like, we have people who are left behind, and while others get richer every day. And that is why I'm on the political left. Technically my philosophy is even farther to the left than any of the parties that we have, right? Mm-hmm. Because And when you say you don't feel represented by the parties in your country, like I feel the same way, because the thing about political parties is they always want to appeal to the status quo on some level.
Mm-hmm.
And the status quo leaves, the majority feeling relatively comfortable, relatively okay, placated, because they can have their house and they can have their car, and as long as they work, they don't have to suffer too much. The fact that they're one paycheck away from bankruptcy doesn't mean much if they keep getting those paychecks, right? so it's yeah, I mean, class is a major issue, but
let's bring it back to your podcasts.
Sure.
I just want to know kind of like, what are you hoping to achieve with these as far as like your goals? Like where do you want to get with this? Do you have plans beyond podcasting? Like what are you trying to achieve in this field?
Well, I mean, I used to run a podcast that when I was part of the Skeptic and Atheist community. I ran a podcast for 6 years, and I developed a love for the art of podcasting and for the craft of audio engineering, audio editing, and talking to people, just the interview process. I love that. And so if I could do that as a job, that would be ideal.
I'm the same.
That's the goal, like, ultimately. But also I got to be true to my philosophy, right?
Okay.
So I also want to help people learn more about left-wing politics. I want to help people understand that anarchists aren't just breaking windows. We're not just the people who go out and break windows and riot. We're also people who, promote things like food, not bomb, to stop being murdered by the state. And we want everybody to get their basic needs met. And I want to promote social justice. Like I want to promote anti-racism and feminism and anything that I think will help society improve is something that I want to promote.
Excellent.
And that's where I'm at with that.
Oh, thank you for that. Well, since you've done podcasting for such a long time, I want to ask you this: what tips would you give to aspiring podcasters? Like, what could you sort of give as advice, considering you've done it for so long and you've been been successful with it? What tips would you give?
We kind of gave it at the start. Have a backup. If you're recording, you got to make sure you got a backup. Because you could easily lose audio. I've lost some pretty quality audio content at times in the past. So it's very frustrating, but also I find if you can do it without doing too much work, adding video makes a big difference. A lot of people really like watching things on YouTube as well as listening, but you have to have the audio as well, because a lot of people can't watch YouTube. Like when I'm working, I can listen to audio, but I can't watch a video. So there's a lot of that going on too. So you got to have both, I think. I
totally agree. Yeah, it's different as well. I see sometimes people brand it as vodcast, which is interesting. So it's a new concept I've come across, but it's true. From what I can see, on average, more people listen to my podcast via the audio platforms I have rather than the video one. And I expected that from the beginning, because who's going to sit and watch, a YouTube video for maybe 2 hours? You know what I mean?
Right.
And a lot of people that listen to my podcast regulars, they always tell me that they have it on in the background. And I'm like, that's how I would do it.
That's perfect.
I think it's normal. But yeah, it's a different medium. I think for most podcasters out there, making clips is something you need to do, not just to attract attention to what you're doing, but also to encourage people to actually check out your podcast. As much as it sucks for me having to edit for ages to do it, it's so essential. If I didn't do it, and I'm kind of annoyed I didn't do it sooner, because There's many
Right.
episodes I need to catch up on, old ones that I need to clip up eventually. But it actually does really drive interest towards your podcast. You know, those little clips, those little. I like to think of it like a highlight reel. You know, it's like the best
Right.
moments. And when I'm doing my editing, you know, I used to just clip everything that I thought would get views or would be interesting. Now I'm like, no, let's try and clip the things that obviously are topic worthy or you know, we'll get a little bit of attention that, you know, will get attention. And
Right.
B, the things that were actually the best moments, the things that do stand out and were the best actual moments of that particular episode. And that, but I think that requires a lot of dedication to actually sit back and watch yourself and be involved. And that's something you need to do, people, if you want to do a podcast. Like whenever I see people, I've said this a million times before, so broken record. You know, if you're setting up a podcast, make sure that you do your research and you're dedicated to it, because it is something that takes a lot of time and effort. And you know, one of the things I've done more recently is to try and space out my podcast, do like one a week. Because I do a bunch of other stuff, and fair enough, if you're only doing podcasting, you can do more, and I get that, you know, but it takes a lot of time that you have to dedicate. And for me, that became a problem because, you know, I'm doing a bunch of other stuff. So I sort of reasoned, okay, once a week, that works for me. I'm prepared to put in the time for that one episode.
Right.
And I'll sometimes do more if I get a bit more demand or particular guest or whatever. But I do think it's better to kind of space them out and do them like a less is more approach, you know. I think that's always
right. Yeah, like one of the podcasts I used to listen to that reached actual like could hire other people and like run multiple shows with these. One of the things they said about their very first show is that they had to maintain a consistent schedule and always have one episode out per week or per 2 weeks. Like if that's your schedule, they had to have it out regularly. But it depends too. Like if you have the content and people are coming for your content, I think that you're going to find people will stick with you, even if you're, you know, have to take a hiatus for a while or whatever.
This is true. Yeah. And I can't stand this kind of like having a schedule. Because mine changes all the time, and you know, I go according to demand. Do you know what I mean? So like ideally I try to get an episode out every week, but it's not guaranteed. I mean, I don't think I've ever missed a week for a long time, so I've been lucky in that respect, but it has been down to demand. You know, there might be times when I don't get guests, when I don't get so lucky.
Right.
And you know, I've got a backup plan for that. I've got, you know, particular topics that I want to cover just in general, but I think that the podcast has always been better when it's been this interview style, this discussion style, and it's more enjoyable for me as well. Like it's very different when it's just sitting and talking to the mic. It's just like a long-winded YouTube video, and I do put the same amount of effort in. I put the research time in and stuff, but it's just not the same, man. It's just
right. And like I have kids, right? So my time that I'm able to be alone is very limited. So I have to be very when I can do it. So having a rigid schedule doesn't always work. Like,
I always ask my guests this, and I think it's an interesting question to ask. What are the best and worst things about Regina, Saskatchewan?
Well, I mean, the best and worst things. The best thing about Regina is that it takes itself seriously in the sense that it feels like a big town, but it isn't a big city, right? It's only 380,000 people or something like that. Like it's not a very big city, but so it's easy to get around everywhere, but it still feels like a city. The worst thing is the streets. So, which hopefully they'll improve on.
What specifically? The roads, you mean?
Yeah. We have a lot of one-way streets, and we have a lot of bad potholes.
Yes. Pesky pothole problem. That's why every country has that problem, and it's like, look, local government, just spend the money. All right. Your people will thank you.
That's right. Yeah.
I'm willing to pay a bit more in taxes if you just fix the roads so people don't risk killing themselves. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Well, for my Saskatchewan politics show, I often listen in to city council meetings for my local city council. And they have debates sometimes about things that I consider very silly, like how tall you're allowed to let your grass grow before they will fine you.
Key issues, pressing issues facing our nation. Right. How tall can your shrubs be?
Yeah, your grass needs to be well kept so that our city looks beautiful. But
God forbid we lose out in the most beautiful city of the year award. Like,
very silly.
Let's go on a more serious note. I love asking this question. What is the biggest life lesson that you've learned so far?
Don't stay humble. You don't know everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, yeah. Be like, because you have to be able to listen to people who know more about a thing, right? And you, like, personally, I'm just a guy. I dropped out of high school. I flunked out of university. I've been a laborer for 20 years. I'm not what I would think of as like an unintelligent person, but clearly I'm not an expert on anything. So,
I will add to this though, because I think it's important. Like you said, oh, you know, I dropped out of these places. I've been a laborer 20 years. Like there seems to be this thing that exists in society where laboring is somehow like looked down on, and I never understand that because
you're right.
Good, just like good, honest, solid, hard work never hurt anybody. You know, that's how I was raised as well. Like, you know, I've had all sorts of jobs. I've worked physical jobs. I've worked in offices, you name it. Yeah. I'm never afraid to get my hands dirty and do some hard work, right? You can learn a lot of good life lessons from doing hard physical work. That's number one. Number two, people seem to have this impression that you can't earn a lot of money. And that is further from the truth. Here in the UK, for instance, I have an uncle who does scaffolding.
Okay.
And he was just sitting telling me about, like, this was last year before the lockdowns and everything that happened. So it's my last chance seeing him. And he was just telling me about how much he would earn in a month. And I was sitting there like, how much? I was like, that's insane. And he's like, yeah, that's normal for scaffolding. And I was like, I would dream of earning that much. I mean, like even in my highest paying office job, I would not even come close to that. But that's the reality. Like, physical skills are highly sought after, and what you can do with those skills is almost invaluable. And I don't know. I mean, maybe that attitude is disappearing a bit more over time now, you know. But I still feel like it exists a little bit there sometimes. And you know, for me personally, I've got a unique perspective in that I've worked in all kind of fields, so I kind of see everything as equal. I just see it as different routes. You know, some people are skilled with their hands, some with their minds, some with, you know, whatever. Like it's different skills, different human skills.
And the guys, like I say, like the guys that I work with, they're truck drivers. They come in and go. The guys that I used to work with, because we used to have more than one person on at my job. So I would never describe any of them as not smart people. Right? Like they all know more about this thing or that thing than you could find. Like a university professor doesn't know how to do pipe fitting. Right. So
it's different. It's different types of intelligence. I think that's the problem. People always assume that like academia and books and stuff is the only form of intelligence, and it's not true. Like intelligence comes in different forms. I think the one thing though that unites us all is common sense. That one is one that misses a lot of people, and it doesn't matter if you're, you know, really, really dumb in general or you're a college professor. I mean, my mum, she works in a university, right? And the amount of time she's told me about a PhD student who came and did like, I don't know, interning or like some summer work or something. And she said, like, these people are stupid. They don't understand like basic stuff. And it's like, I get that you spend all your time studying physics or whatever. That's great. But how can you not know how to do some basic office filing, or you get confused about using this computer or whatever? And it's like,
Right.
I think basically, I guess my point with this is intelligence comes in many different forms, and just try and educate yourself in all areas. There's nothing wrong
as much
with
as
learning.
you
And be as open-minded as you can in all areas, and just learn everywhere, because any type of knowledge is, I think, valuable knowledge in some shape or form.
I have a friend who he went to school for your philosophy, and he got his degree, and he says, like, if I had stayed long enough to get my PhD, I'm sure that I would lose the ability to turn on a light switch.
I mean, to be fair, if you spend enough time away from something, you know what I mean? So some things stick around, some things are like muscle memory. But I agree with that. I think it's the more you do something, the better you get at it. It's like if I guitar, for instance, I've played guitar all my life. But there's been, when I was at uni, barely played, I just didn't have the time. And then I started getting back into it more in more recent years. And I didn't forget how to do it, but like, my fingers started getting blisters again. I had to build them up again. Had to just practice just to get better at strumming again, because I just was messy. The messiness is gone now. But it's about practice. You got to practice anything you do.
Yep. Yeah. And that includes thinking. Like,
yeah, totally agree. As we draw things to a close for today, do you have any upcoming projects or maybe some final thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Long pause. No, big projects, nothing in particular. Like, I'm just trying to get my shows out every 2 weeks, because I record with other people for some of them. And so I'm just trying to keep those going. And as for final thoughts, I just think that, like, obviously I'm biased, but I think that a lot of people have misconceptions when it comes to like left-wing politics. And I think that if one actually tries to learn the philosophies a little bit, you don't have to like read the wiki page, just try to, and don't maybe you could stop having a caricature of the person you disagree with in your head.
Right. Yeah, totally agree. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all human, and we're going to disagree on stuff. I've had conversations with people that I've disagreed with on certain issues, but we had a healthy conversation. We didn't attack each other. I think the problem is people make things too personal. And don't get me wrong, some issues are deeply personal, and they should be for a reason. But other things, it's like, hey, it's okay if we disagree on this. Like, we can still be friends. We can still, do you know what I mean? I think that's a good point and a lesson for us all, for sure.
And social media doesn't help, but
no, that's especially places like Twitter is just like a war zone. I avoid it.
Yeah. I try to stay off Twitter as much as I can.
Okay, Cory, I just want to say a massive thank you for agreeing to be on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. And to all my listeners, thank you very much for watching the Christian Reeve Podcast on YouTube. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, all those audio platforms, or wherever you listen to the podcast, make sure to leave us a review, check us out, give us a follow. Let me know who you would like to see on the show next, what you would like to hear on the show next. Be safe, be well, and I'll see you in the next one.